started reading this book here, which is The Sins on Their Bones by Laura R. Samotin, which is an arc that I won through a Goodreads giveaway, but I haven't yet spoken to camera about it. So that is what I'm doing here this evening. I am just about to start chapter 6. So I read 50 some pages and I have some thoughts already. The back cover here calls out specifically that this is perfect for fans of Leigh Bardugo, C.S. Pascat, Ava Reid, and Catherine Arden. Now, I have read Leigh Bardugo and Ava Reid, and I can see the inspiration that is coming from those two authors. The darker, haunting, descriptive tone of Ava Reid I can really see already in the first 50 pages. And I'm finding a lot of parallels in only 50 pages to Leigh Bardugo's Grishaverse. And I am very curious if the origins of this book have something to do with that, if they started as perhaps a spin-off from the Grishaverse and are pulling from those beloved characters, because I can definitely see in this book here, one of the main characters is very reminiscent of Kaz Brekker. There is another character who's very reminiscent of the Darkling. There are characters who remind me of Jesper and Inej, which just feels like a lot. And this is obviously an arc, so I'm not sure if it's going to make it into the final copy, but there was a character described as acting or behaving like a crow. And if you know me, you know I love the crows. I loved Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. So I'm very curious about how the rest of this book is going to pan out. And I haven't even given a description so far because I just have so many thoughts and feelings about those parallels that I'm already picking up on. And I think with Leigh Bardugo being written right on the back cover here, if you are trying to draw those fans of Bardugo's world and the Grishaverse, you are expecting those comparisons to be made. And I can't imagine that I am the only one who is going to be having some questions about those comparisons and parallels between those books. However, the Sins on Their Bones, you can see here, it is the call out on the bottom says that it is a queer Jewish fantasy world that feels real enough to step into. And so far it has been really descriptive and evocative in a really compelling way that I have been enjoying. And it is set in a Jewish folklore-inspired reimagining of 19th century Eastern Europe. It is a queer dark fantasy debut that pits two estranged husbands and a daring spy master on opposite ends of a civil war. So we have thus far been introduced to Dimitri, who is our main male character. Dimitri is the rightful heir to the throne, but he is currently in exile because his not ex-husband, but former husband, because they're separated from my understanding, Alexei, has basically taken the throne from him. That is what has been described so far. And in terms of content warnings, there is a little blurb at the beginning of this book and then further information on Samotin's website that this does include depictions and descriptions of domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, and PTSD with the anxiety and depression that can come along from being in those environments and suffering that abuse. On her website, she does go into a little bit more depth, and she does say that there are going to be POVs from the victim, who is Dimitri, as well as the abuser, who is Alexei. And I have already encountered a few POV chapters from Alexi, and it's interesting to read through the lens of someone who is obviously a fractured individual. He is human to an extent, but I'm intrigued and cautious about how the abuse is, how the depiction of the abuse is going to be influenced by having the perspective of the abuser. And it's a very fine line to walk, wherein you're trying to show complex characters while also not giving someone an out to abuse someone and not trying to justify that abuse, because that, I feel, for me at least, as a reader and as a individual, a human, that's a very firm line. There shouldn't be a justification for said abuse. But so far, we've met Dimitri, we've met Alexi, we've met the 4 companion characters who are with Dimitri in exile in a safe house, who feel a little bit like a few other members of the Crows, not gonna lie. But only 50 pages in, it's 416 pages. So I am liking it a lot so far. I don't read a lot of fiction that has that Eastern European inspiration. I would say Ava Reed, as well as, there was another book that I read not too long ago, Don't Call the Wolf. I think I did a reading blog about it. Don't Call the Wolf by, not Rebecca Ross. I'll maybe insert a photo here. That was a Canadian author who, that was their debut as well, and it was Eastern European inspired. So I can count kind of on one hand the novels that I have read that have that Eastern European influence. And although it's not something that I read super frequently, I feel like the British or Irish or Scottish influence in fantasy is much more prevalent and dominates a lot of the books that I read, and just a lot of the books in the genre in general. I really have enjoyed the few Eastern European inspired fantasy books that I have read. So I am intrigued and excited to see how that culture gets depicted in this book here as well. It's a debut author. I love discovering new authors, and I am looking forward to reading more of this, and I will take you along for the ride. So yeah, let's go. Hello again. I have been wanting to give an update on my thoughts because I am now 2/3 of the way through this book, and I've actually stopped reading the last couple of days because I didn't want to finish without giving a little update as to my thoughts and feelings so far. I am really enjoying it. I do still have those hesitations that I had previously talked about, in that I really think this started as fan fiction, and I don't mean that as an insult. I love the 21st century development of the pipeline from fan fiction to traditionally published works becoming more mainstream and talked about. And also there's that whole meme of fan fiction has existed since Dante was writing the Inferno. So I don't say that to speak negatively about The Sins on Their Bones and what Samotin has accomplished with this book. But I say it in that I think it's important for readers to know before they go into a book whether something is its own entity or whether it has its roots in another fandom. I think that's really important. It's imperative for readers to know where the ideas came from, because if you are not willing to honestly speak about the origins of your intellectual property and how it began as part of something else, then that changes the way that I personally would view a book, right? I don't know if any of that made sense. But if it did not begin its life as fan fiction, then suddenly it feels disingenuous and it feels not right that there are so many similarities between the two works. And especially in this case, the fact that they say on the back cover, at least on the arc, I'm not sure if it will be on the back cover of the final published product, but they say on the back here that it's for fans of Leigh Bardugo. And if that is your target audience, if those are the readers that you're trying to capture, I think you need to speak to them on the same level and admit and acknowledge that this began within that fandom. I don't think it's appropriate or right to talk down to readers, and there are so many similarities in this book to the Grisha verse that it feels a lot like talking down to the readers if you're not willing to acknowledge the origins of the project. But more and more authors began their journey in writing fan fiction. So it's not a surprise to me if this did start as fan fiction. Like, it had to have started as fan fiction. I really want to email the contact on the back here and ask them, because I haven't been able to find anything online, and it will really impact how I review the book, because it's one thing to review a book that owns the fact that it was fan fiction and owns the fact that all of these similarities and associations are on purpose, because obviously these original characters began as different characters. It is different to review a book that does that versus a book that doesn't acknowledge those similarities and associations. A book that just says, nope, this is 100% its own intellectual property. And obviously there are going to be similarities to multiple works. Fantasy tropes share a lot of commonalities. There is nothing that doesn't borrow from the books that came previously. But if you're going to make references to a character being like a crow on top of a roof, then I think you need to open yourself up to the conversation of whether or not that character began its life as a Kaz Brecker insert. I don't know if I will be able to edit this down to anything that makes sense, because I'm trying to be very careful with how I am discussing my thoughts and feelings, because I am really enjoying it. And I had some hesitations before I began of the abuser's perspective being included in the text, because I was very hesitant and nervous that including the abuser's perspective would in some way try to excuse their actions, excuse their abuse, versus just trying to show convoluted characters. And I don't think that Samotin has done that. I think the perspective of the abuser has been included, but there has been nothing so far that has tried to excuse that person's actions. Obviously, they have their own monologue in their head of what they're trying to do, but the actual prose doesn't excuse the abuse that they are doing to other people. So that was a big relief. As well, abuse is a very prominent theme and part of the plot in this book, and it is quite heartbreaking to read. But I think some of the descriptions that have been included and certain turns of phrases and prose have felt incredibly apt, very honest, very realistic. So I do appreciate how that has been included in the book. One other point on the topic of whether something has its origins in an individual setting out to create their own world and universe versus building off of a previously established universe like the Grishaverse, that would obviously impact the world building, because when you are writing fan fiction, you are jumping into a world that has already been created. Yes, you can change elements of that world to best fit your story and best fit the characters that you are doing your own spin on, but a huge part of that world has already been established. And readers going into those works know the world. So they're able to pick up on the differences, but you're not building something from the ground up. I do think that the world building in this book isn't the strongest I've ever seen. And I think part of that is my own confusion as to whether I should go into this book expecting something like the Grishaverse, where I already know what cogs are in the wheel and it's just little added bits that are being strewn throughout the book to create this author's own take on that world. But yes, the world building has felt a little bit lacking because of that, or it hasn't been as strong as I would hope for it to be. And a lot of that is just confusion. I've been talking for more than 20 minutes now, and I don't know if anything of what I have said has made sense, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And as I previously said, or as I might have previously said, a lot of my thoughts and feelings on this book kind of hinge on whether it is its own world or whether it was built upon the blocks of the Grishaverse, because that is going to impact the character development that takes place and the world building that takes place. So I'm going to do some more sleuthing online, I think. I might reach out to Penguin. I don't know if that's appropriate. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. This is a debut publication, but I'm just so curious. I'm just so curious, and I really, really want to know, because yeah, for the most part, I am really enjoying it. But, right, okay, so here. So this is our Dimitri character, who I feel is a lot like Kaz Brecker. And then this character is our spy master, whose name is Vasily, and he feels a lot like Jesper to me. But so yes, I am going to read a little bit more of this tonight. Things are definitely ramping up. Maybe it says even in the author's note at the end. I don't know. Okay, I'm gonna read this, maybe draft an email, and will let you know my final thoughts for one last check-in. It has been many, many weeks now since I started my reading vlog of The Sins on Their Bones. Actually, does that work? No, you can't see that. Let's get cozy. I wanted to get this reading vlog and my review out before the publication of this novel. That unfortunately did not happen. Life got crazy, my best friend was getting married, but I'm here now to discuss my final thoughts because I have finished the book. I did also bite the bullet and I emailed Penguin and I asked if The Sins on Their Bones began as Ca's Darkling fanfiction, and it did. So I am really happy that I just did that, sent that email so that now I know, because it has informed my opinion and my review of the book quite a lot, because it just makes sense. And I should have trusted myself, because it's not as if any of the characters were gender bent. The Ca's insert character, Dimitri, is described on like page 6 or page 7 as sitting like a crow on the roof of the building, their hideout. And Annika, who is the Inej insert, is described as having a bunch of weapons on her. And Vasily, who is the Jesper type character, or Jesper insert character, is a bisexual. He has a gambling problem, and he's very much in love with Dimitri / Kaz. I'm very uncertain, even still, how I feel about this book. I think I wanted to love it more than I did / do. Therefore, I feel a little bit guilty that I didn't love it as much as I expected to, or as much as I wanted to. It kind of just feels a little bit middle of the road. I don't think I will go back and reread the book, and that's a test that I've been giving myself when trying to reflect on how I rate or how I feel about a book. Would I willingly and happily go back and reread it? Because I love rereading books, and if I really, really love a book, I will without a doubt go back and reread it at one point down the road. I don't think that is the case with this book. The door is left open for a sequel at the end of the book. I'm not sure if I care enough for the characters to continue along with them on their journey. I really, really wanted to. I wanted to love this book so much, and it just fell a little bit flat. I think I would give it about a 3.5 star rating, because it wasn't a bad book by any means. It was, however, a very difficult book to read, because abuse and the trauma of abuse and the trauma of sexual assault and domestic violence is the core theme in this book. And I think Samotin did an incredible job with how she presented domestic violence and sexual abuse. The trauma that she shows on the page felt very true to life for me. I think in fantasy in particular, I've spoken about this on my channel before, sexual violence tends to get glossed over. It's used as a trope, and not much page space is given to the aftermath of that trauma and the way that that sits with a person or a character for a really long time. I do think it's a shame that the world and the character building for this universe wasn't fleshed out enough for the book to stand on its own merits. I personally found the parallels to the Grishaverse to be so strong and prevalent, and I needed to know that in order to understand the characters' motivations. So I think that's kind of something that got lost in the editing. Enough wasn't given to these characters and to this world for it to stand on its own and to feel like an introduction to these characters and to this world. Instead, an understanding of the Grishaverse feels necessary to really enjoy this book, which is a shame. So 3.5 stars, kind of rounded up from 3. I wanted to like this book a lot more than I did. I kind of forget what I've already spoken about previously, I do think Samotin is an incredibly gifted author. She is incredibly emotive in her writing, and I actually found an article online in which she was talking about how fan fiction authors do tend to be more emotive because fan fiction as a whole is much more focused on the emotions rather than the world building. So if a lack of world building is something that doesn't bother you in particular, you might get a little bit more from this book than I did. I think there's a very niche audience that will get the most from The Sins on Their Bones. And unfortunately, that wasn't quite me. My camera battery is now dying, so I will leave it there for now. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about my thoughts, I will link my full-length review down below. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Bye for now. That was stupid.